Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to this webinar organized by the Diplomatic Institute of the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Um, so I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, which has such um, a theme that I think more up to date it would be impossible in light of the recent events that have been happening in the region. But so, first of all, I would like to present the apologies of the director of the Diplomatic Institute, Ambassador Freitas Vaz, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today for personal reasons. But so he asked me to moderate instead of him, and I hope you'll help me do a good job in that. The Red Sea. The Red Sea is a vital artery for global trade, as we all know. It has become a focal point of escalating tensions. The tensions are not atypical to the region, of course, but since late 2023, with the start of the Israel-Hamas war on October 7th, the region has witnessed a surge in attacks on commercial vessels, which has disrupted this vital shipping lane and has raised concerns about the security of this critical waterway. That can have a great political and economic impact far beyond the region. The consequences are stark. Disrupted supply chains threaten to send prices soaring for consumers worldwide, and the insurance costs for navigating these waters. The specter of a wider confrontation looms large, potentially disrupting energy supplies and crippling international trade even further. Understanding the root causes of this crisis and the key players involved is no longer just an academic exercise. It has become crucial for navigating the increasingly complex and volatile situation in the Red Sea. This webinar will explore the current crisis, analyzing the key players and motivations behind the conflict, and delve into the impact that these tensions have exerted on global trade and the potential consequences for the region's stability, for the EU, and specifically for Portugal. Joining us today are two specialists. Mihai Sebastian Chihaya is policy analyst in the World Program. Welcome, Mihai. He works mainly on Middle East political and security issues, EU-Middle East relations, as well as EU foreign policy aspects and European defense integration. Before joining EPC, Mihai worked for the European Business Summit, and prior to that, he was part of the security and defense program of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, where he focused on transatlantic relations, US foreign policy, cybersecurity, and NATO policies. He previously gained experience in the Secretariat General of the European Commission on Political and Security Issues and in the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Middle East Affairs. Mr. Chihaya holds a bachelor's in international relations and European studies, a master's in security studies and European integration, and a PhD in political science from the Alexandru Ioan Cuța University of Iași. Welcome, Mihai. Also with us today is Lieutenant Colonel Jorge Rodrigues. He is an Army Lieutenant Colonel in reserve. He has extensive experience in security and defense matters. He holds a military science course from the Military Academy and has completed several trainings, including promotion to senior officer, special operations, military parachuting, and human intelligence. In the civilian sphere, he holds a master's degree in international relations from Universidade Portucalense and a bachelor in management from Oporto Business School. He performed command and staff duties in the Special Operations Training Center, Personnel Command, HQ, and Office of the Army Chief of Staff, and commanded Portuguese participation in several international forces, including the ACE Mobile Force and the NATO Response Force, having participated in a total of 8 international missions. He was responsible for the Oporto delegation of the National Defense Institute and deputy director of the National Defense Course between 2018 and 21, and a founding member of CEISTAD and the Center for Art and Letters, PDAHPE. He has published several articles in the field of international relations, security, and defense. He's an associate researcher at the National Defense Institute and coordinator of the course Geopolitical Risk and Strategy for Executives in partnership with Oporto Business School. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Jorge Rodrigues. It's a pleasure to have you both here. I think we can start our webinar. The rules say that our foreign guest always starts first. So I would give the floor to Mihai, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you as well for the kind introduction. After hearing it, I have to admit, I'm also curious what I have to say. So I'll just jump into it. You asked me to sort of set the scene for about 15, 20 minutes. And then of course, the Colonel will share his thoughts, and then after that, move into discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to also hear your thoughts, and also, of course, to hear you challenging some of the thoughts that we mention here. I thought to focus on 5 points in this introductory remark. First, I would maybe put into context the crisis in the Red Sea in the context of global maritime security. Secondly, I will talk a little bit about European Union's approach to maritime security and what has been done at the European Union level. Then thirdly, I will go into the Red Sea crisis. I will focus a little bit on the timeline, what has happened, and also on the impact of the developments there. Then fourth, I will look a little bit into the European Union's reaction, and specifically the Operation Aspides that was launched in February. And then last is more of a few thoughts on what's important as we look next for the EU engagement, for the EU security and defense activities sort of more broadly, and how the crisis in the Red Sea impacts the thinking in Brussels. So a lot to cover, so I'm just going to start directly. First point. Now we live in an age of maritime competition, and the importance of the maritime domain has significantly increased in the past years. And we need to see the crisis in the Red Sea as a part of a bigger picture. Why this importance the importance has increased? Well, it has increased because the geopolitical competition has increased, and automatically the geopolitical competition at seas has increased, but also the threats in the maritime security have increased significantly in the past years. And just maybe to give a few examples of events that have in the maritime domain that have a huge impact on everything globally. I would maybe go back to 2021, when you all remember the blockage of the Suez Canal and the impact on supply chains and the consequences of that at global level. Then, of course, we also have to refer to the war in Ukraine and the Black Sea specifically. And we saw how the war there has impacted the grain exports, and how it has impacted different countries, especially in the Middle East, but not only. And here it's also an angle of maritime warfare in the Black Sea. We see a full naval warfare. We see new technologies being deployed, very relevant in the broader context of security and defense. Then another important development is the different attacks to critical maritime infrastructure that have taken place in the past 2 years. And here, of course, I refer to the sabotage of Nord Stream 2. and the sabotage that was in 2022, if I remember correctly, and in 2023 it was the sabotage of the Baltic Connector, which was both an energy pipeline between Finland and Estonia, and also a telecommunication cable. So we see how these this sabotage to critical infrastructure has effects very broadly to economics, at political level, at diplomatic, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, closing the circle is the crisis in the Red Sea. That we have seen over the past months, how, I mean, Joanna has rightly pointed out the impact on prices globally, on supply chains, on trade more broadly, but also an impact at the military level. If we look at the response from the US, the allies, the EU to this. I think in the context and moving in this context and moving to the second point, which is the EU engagement in maritime security. Of course, the maritime domain is extremely relevant for the EU. It's key, of course, to its economy, to its trade, and the EU has always, at least in the past 15, 20 years, has played a role in the maritime security at the global level. But more recently, maritime at policy level, more maritime security occupies an important space in the EU strategic compass, which is the EU strategy for security and defense, which was adopted in March 2022. And there are several, there, of course, it's mentioned the importance of maritime security and several steps to be taken. One of them is an updated maritime security strategy, which was published in 2023. At more moving beyond the policy level and moving more to sort of operational one, the EU also has taken several measures in the area of maritime security. And here there are a couple of naval in the framework of the CSDP. I'm thinking about Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean some years back, Operation Irini, Operation Atalanta, and now Operation Aspides. There is also a new concept applied at the level of the EU of coordinated maritime presence that the EU has deployed, which basically meant pooling resources from on a voluntary basis, from different member states in Gulf of Guinea. That was the first test case. But maybe just to add here at the European level, a trend that it's important, I think, to keep in mind as we go more in the discussion about the Red Sea developments, which is the naval capabilities of the EU member states. And here, the trend is that in the past 30 years, these naval capabilities have declined significantly, and no major investments have been made. So there is a major challenge at this point in terms of a lack of naval capabilities. That will be very relevant as we go into the Operation Aspides. Maybe I can go now quickly into the Red Sea crisis. I'm not going to go over all the developments, but just a couple of points. Of course, we've seen since October last year, there have been significant numbers of drone and missile attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, operated by the Houthis in response to the Israeli war in Gaza. This, of course, I think it's important to look also in the motivation of Houthis. Of course, there is an ideological purpose here, and an ideological dimension here, of course, of support for the Palestinians, but there's also a more strategic internal dimension where the Houthis have used these attacks to show their capabilities, to gain support in Yemen, but also regionally. Here, of course, there's also the Iranian dimension and the Iranian support for the Houthis, but we'll get to that later on. I think as major developments after this, the attack started have been, of course, in December, when the United States announced a naval operation called the Prosperity Guardian. Here, several allies, besides the US, have come together to protect the shipping in the Red Sea. And then, of course, in January, we see a major development in the sense that the US and UK, supported by other countries, have started to strike targets inside Yemen with the aim of deterring the Houthis from conducting these attacks on commercial ships. I think it's important to mention that initially the commercial ships targeted had an Israeli link, or at least this is what the Houthis maintained. But then the ships have expanded to many other countries, less China and Russia. I think here an important point is the effectiveness of these airstrikes in deterring the Houthis attacks. And the opinions of many analysts differ here, but I think in general there is agreement that these attacks have not managed to deter the Houthis and have had a limited impact, and probably at this level they'll continue to have a limited impact. Then, of course, another major development is in February when the EU launched Operation Aspidis, an operation that aims to accompany vessels, commercial vessels, to protect them, but also to reinforce maritime situational awareness in the region. I will maybe add here in developments that I see the attacks as escalatory, in the sense that already in the beginning of March we see a loss of life in the ships that are attacked. We also have seen a ship that was sank after a Houthi attack, and on top of this we've also seen the cut of some telecommunications cables in the Red Sea. It's unclear yet how this happened. I think the explanation that came from the US side was that when the ship sunk, it cut some of the cables. But this points back to one of my earlier points regarding the protection of critical infrastructure, which is a major priority for the EU at the European level, both for the EU and NATO. Now, as of impact, if we look at the impact, and I'm just going to quote a few figures from the International Monetary Fund that show that the transits through the Suez Canal have declined from an average of around 74 in 2023 to about 35 in the recent weeks. That's about half. At the same time, the transits around the Cape of Good Hope in the south have nearly doubled, just to get an idea of the impact. Of course, when we talk about the impact, we cannot not mention the cargo insurance that has gone up. There's, of course, an additional war premium that was added because of the risk, and of course, the cost of transporting containers has significantly increased. And last but not least, that many ships, of course, they have rerouted their voyages. On impact, of course, there's also the impact of the US and UK strikes in Yemen, but I've already covered that. Now moving to the EU's response and the Aspidis mission, I think here it's important to mention that EU engagement in the region is not new. There have been several initiatives in the past, such as anti-piracy Operation Atalanta, which has been running there since 2008, if I remember correctly, but also several member states have developed outposts in the region, and here I'm thinking about Italy, France, Spain as well, and others. Now, this operation, the Operation Aspidis, I think it's important to mention that this operation is not envisaged to take part in the strikes inside Yemen. It's strictly a defensive operation, and here I think it's important how we understand defensive. Defensive in a sense of protecting the vessels, accompanying them, and increasing situational awareness in the region. This mission is also, of course, separate from the US-led operation. And here, I think that the thinking at the European level, in the capitals, but also here in Brussels, was to dissociate European engagement in the Red Sea from the US engagement in the Red Sea. And I think besides the objectives of the mission, the ones that are stated, there are also other objectives that are more broader. One of them is, of course, to build trust and confidence with the regional Arab states, and also not to escalate tensions in the region. This is why also several European states have specifically declared that they're not taking part in attack strikes in Yemen. I think also here there was a recent report of what the mission has achieved since it was launched on the 19th of February. I think from the recent reports, it was mentioned that 68 ships have been escorted and around 11 attacks were repelled so far, which is quite a lot, given that it's 2 months and a half, soon almost 3 months now, actually. I think here I would also point out that protecting these vessels is a different sort of mission than the previous European mission, such as Atalanta, which was it is an anti-piracy mission. Here there is a different mandate, because here we're talking about a different level of engagement. We're talking about defending against drones, defending against missiles. And these must be countered with high-end capabilities, also with missiles, for instance. And this will point out to a later debate on actually the European capabilities and what would be needed on long term to tackle this. But I'll come back to that. Maybe just a few thoughts, and then I will end. On something that we need to pay attention to the future and think more about. One is how all these operations in the region can better, coordinate between themselves. The US operation, of course, the Prosperity Guardian, the Aspides, the Atalanta operation. Of course, coordinating everything is on one side an operational challenge, of course. But it's also important when we look at the engagement on long term in the mission. We also need to think, what will happen next? What if, for instance, situation will, of course, calm down at some point? What will be next in the mandate of these missions? The mandate of the Aspides is for 1 year. And at this point, of course, it's too early to tell how will this be expanded, if it will be expanded. Then it's important also to ask ourselves how can these operations foster further cooperation with governments of the countries in the region, and how long can these operations sustain their deterrence efforts? That's something just to think about. I think I still have a couple of minutes, right, Joanna? Maybe I'll just go into my last point, but just very briefly, and then we'll come back to this, which is the way forward, what we should be looking at. Of course, one is the future of EU engagements globally. And here in the maritime domain, we see that the EU has been very successful, of course, compared to other areas. And this is because it's easier to reach an agreement between member states. Because, of course, when you look at the EU, member states have different interests. Some of them, they don't have any maritime interests, so of course they don't take part in this this discussion. But when we're talking about global engagement in the maritime area, we see the EU using this coalition of the willing format, where countries come in on voluntary basis, and then there is not necessarily a decision needed collectively among all member states. So in this case, and here a good example is another engagement of EU in the region is the EMASOH mission, the Maritime Awareness Mission in the Strait of Hormuz, which is not an European Union mission there, but it's rather a mission that was started by some member states, and then it received the blessing of the collective EU. because it didn't needed the agreement of all the member states. So I think when we look ahead, this is how European engagement globally will most likely look like, with coalition of the willing. Now, another issue is capabilities that I mentioned before. And the question is whether the EU has the necessary capabilities to support its sort of global ambition. Here, the global ambition will be the EU as a maritime security provider. And here, and I think the discussion is Chatham House, right? All right. Here we've seen already some examples of lack of capabilities or capabilities that haven't been upgraded. I think we've seen in the past days in the news some malfunctions in the frigates that different European states have sent or were about to send to the region. There was a case for a Danish frigate, and then there was a case of a Belgian frigate, which apparently wasn't operational ready. But it was supposed to be. So I think this goes back to my earlier point on the fact that in the past 30 years, the naval capabilities of European countries have been declining. So here there's a case to be made to invest in these naval capabilities. Of course, at this point, the debate, as you know, at European level, is more related to terrestrial capabilities, to territorial defense. So, of course, the naval domain doesn't occupy the top of the agenda, but this is something that we should definitely think more about. Then, of course, related to this, the European navies need mass and scale. We see that the threats are all across the spectrum. So here it's important to develop more naval platforms, more unmanned vehicles. I think this is something that needs to be a priority. In a sense, it is for different European defense projects and initiatives, such as the PESCO projects or the European Defense Fund. But here, more funds need to be dedicated for this. This also points, of course, to a budget issue, that more budgets need to be dedicated for security and defense at the EU level. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we've seen several EU member states increasing their defense budgets, or at least announcing that they increase their defense budgets. This needs to happen also in practice, not only on paper, because if those capabilities don't actually make it in the field, they don't mean anything. If different countries just announce an increase in budget. And maybe last point is to acknowledge that maritime security threats cannot be addressed in silos. So we need to think all across the spectrum how these threats are interlinked with each other. And I think I'll stop here, and then we'll come back to some of the points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mihai. It's a very updated explanation of what is going on in the field, in this case in the sea. It's quite striking how the attacks have been and the tensions have been rising in such short period. Of course, we had piracy before, but it's totally different what we are having nowadays. And in fact, in the beginning, it was mostly directed to ships that had some relation to Israel, because there was supposedly an ideological political connection with the war in Gaza. But nowadays, it's not the case. It's more or less all random commercial ships, and so that's quite worrying, of course. And we should also look at the political root causes of this problem, and not only how to react in terms of militarily wise and security wise. So I now give the floor to Lieutenant Colonel Rodrigues. Can you? Oh, you don't have your mic again. Sorry. Go ahead. Yes, it's allowed. You have to click on your again. You have to click on your mic again. Not hearing you. Wait. Again, I'm going to repeat the process. So now I've allowed you. No? Let's see if I can do this in another way. What about now? No, we can hear you.
Now,
Yes.
Now you hear me.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good.
thank
Perfect.
God. Well,
Perfect.
that's always happening all the time.
Sorry for that.
During
Maybe it was on
COVID
my
was
end.
so bad. Sorry, all. Good morning. I'm sorry for this small problem. Hopefully, we'll get good conditions in the next few minutes. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation received from the Diplomatic Institute. Of course, from his director, Ambassador Freitas Farage, but mostly to Dr. Joanna Gaspar. We much appreciate it. My best to Professor Mihai. First time we share a webinar. Excellent introduction. Was so nice to hear it. And last but not least, of course, it's a great honor to have the chance to discuss this important theme with such an incredible audience. Let's go then. First of all, I would like to stress that on these crisis moments, at the same time, are the windows for opportunities for the sharpest one. So we have to consider the risk, of course, and managing the risks, but also to see how can we take advantage of it, and perhaps Portugal, with some specific skills, can maximize that. I've been asked to look to the Red Sea crisis and move to the Portuguese perspective. I'd like to give further a multi-dimensional view, only to get to the Portuguese situation in particular, because Portugal is not so big, as you know, probably, and most of the things we received in the indirect form later, perhaps, smoother perhaps, but something happening somewhere before coming to Portugal. So the crisis itself became a scene of major action with piracy previously, where we had some problems with our maritime commercial and trade lines, routes, and we had to experience some disruption on the supply chain and so on. And it was much aggravated with Houthis attack, of course. That put it in crisis some major nets that we had already prepared, global nets, of course, that affect our energy supply and the supply routes itself, but not in that dimension that we experienced before with the COVID. So the Middle East itself is quite a tricky area. The name was given in 19th century because we had the Near East in the border of Europe, and we had the Far East with China and Southeast Asia. We didn't have a name for the Middle East. The French gave the Levant, and the British gave the Middle East name. From there to now, we had quite an history, and Portugal was involved on that history. The new Great Game consequences became extremely important, mostly because of the reserves of oil and gas, of course, but also, and I would like to stress that, the choke points, as in this region we have 3 of the major choke points of the world. Hormuz is definitely the biggest, but also Bab el-Mandeb and Suez Canal. This region also represents some crises and conflicts from a historical perspective to nowadays, and from the different branches of Islam, Sunni and Shiite, but also for leadership of the Muslim world between Persian, Arabs, and Turks. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran are the main competitors. But if you consider a global view, we would also include Indonesia. We have multi-security hotspots considering past frozen low-scale conflicts like Iraq, Syria, ISIS, Yemen, and also some diplomatic strong crises, considering, for instance, Qatar versus Saudi Arabia and Emirates. The MENA region did not approve the state of Israel. And there were almost a moment that they were all against Israel, I would say, but not exactly what we are seeing now. And following the Abraham stabilization process, we have some I would say losing moments that will would allow an approach and a stabilization process. That is quite important, even if you consider the global interest, because it's not only a local situation, it's a global situation too, considering the overall picture of the United States keeping track on this region for several reasons, Israel being his biggest friend at the last decades, and Iran is the systemic rival in the region. Of course, China has something to say too. Sometimes it says strongly when their national interests are in danger. And of course, the link between Russia and India is also quite important in the region. But of course, Portugal is important. Why? For Portugal, this is important. Why? Because Portugal is part of, I would say, the Euro-Atlantic security system, of course, also for the part of the liberal world. So normally we have to be to choose sides, and of course we should have the side of liberal world, and that can be quite tricky when we consider all the actors in the region. So for Portugal, for instance, we have a strong soft power ability that can open some doors, and that's why probably we don't have so many problems when we have our military abroad. Probably our diplomatic staff is quite good because of that. We have, of course, bridges built from previous centuries. But on the other hand, when we take any side, of course, the other side won't like it so much. So something is still there. It's an irritating process that we have to consider. What is exactly in stake for Portugal? As we previously saw, there will be a multi-dimensional impact in Portugal. For sure, that will occur directly and indirectly. We are still relying from the effects of COVID-19 and Ukraine war, but Portugal faced yet another geopolitical hurdle with this situation, with potential significant economic, security, and political ramifications. While current disruption will primarily affect trade routes and supply chains, Portugal won't escape the contagion, of course. But the Red Sea importance cannot be underestimated, of course, even for Portugal. But we have alternatives, and we have to consider that as priority. However, energy, commodity prices, regular supply chain could be reflected in our economic and security concerns. And of course, when we consider the instability in the Red Sea, we may induce that shocks to inflation, must lead to cost push ventures, and require quite stick attention to the sticky prices that were induced first from the Ukrainian conflict, but of course that will rally with this second price shock. For instance, the new the cable route would bring the new route would have 10 to 15 days, of course, of shipping journeys, more fuel demands, constraint on supply, and also higher operational costs for all the projects. We don't know exactly how that will affect our economy, because what we felt till now was not at such a steepy increase that we felt. For instance, just to have an idea, in the energy prices, 4% after the 13th April attack, and from there we had a stabilization. So we really don't feel it's so hard as we felt before with the COVID-19. But there are other issues that we must take care of, and perhaps manage the risk, but like identifying the risk appetite we have for that. For instance, we are not ready for the energy transition right now, and that's a fact. And but we have that goal. If you don't take care about the energy security, we may be in a very fragile situation. So what's the point here? The point is that we need to try to find alternatives, as we done to Ukrainian war, for a possible escalate to this conflict. In supply chain, of course, we have to consider also that we'll probably need some extra storage capability. We have to consider even more the risk-taking process of trying to find new markets, new suppliers, in order to be prepared for a longer period of crisis. For instance, we have 90% of national reserves. Is not bad, but on the other hand, is only enough for 3 or 4 weeks, and we are not sure that after that, if we don't have enough refueling, we will be needing to constrain the economy, taking to the most priority institutions and organizations, and provide, for instance, some direction to hospitals, military security, and whatever, leaving behind industry and other economic partners. So I would say that in short term, it's a boon for shipping companies, for sure, but the downwards pressure prices will prevail. It's a minimum short-term impact, but the risks bound conflict escalation exist, and we have to consider that as well. On the other hand, we also have problems in with communication with the submarine cable systems that can affect, of course, the links. Is not the main not the main route, but not the main network, but is disrupting these telecommunication submarine cables would create problems with the duplication of the systems. It would be quite tricky, for instance, even for the global supply chain, as it would create communication problems. On the other hand, and just focusing on security and defense matters, we have to take notice that it's already happened. We had a vessel that was it was controlled, I would say, in the strange matter by the Iranians, in smooth words, of course, and it's only our flag at the moment. It was linked to an Israeli owner. but we don't know the future. We don't know if we will have Portuguese involved in the future in this similar situation. If our military that may be part of some forces in the region can be targeted, it's not a good idea to have some body bags coming back to Portugal. We are not really prepared for this kind of situations, mainly in this conflict, because it's not a regular conflict, and some of the public opinion does not understand what we are doing in the region. It's quite a tricky environment, and we have to take notice of that. But we also have to consider that some actors could lead to terrorist attacks in all over the planet, and of course Portugal as a Western country is of a target, a possible target. Our tourists abroad, our diaspora, and so on, our interests can be targeted too. So we have to consider that as a major problem to the risk too. But we also have the future to consider. After April 13th, the day after, the VUCA world, I would say, it was really the revenge of the geopolitics, because before of this crisis, we had everything linked to economic and prosperity, and now geopolitics brought again the security level. And April 13 shows that it can escalate. It can escalate if we are not concerning the major issues here in this crisis. We may have problems in the near future. We don't know exactly if Israel is going to strike back. There are some indicators that say it will be an attack. Hopefully it won't be too strong or too sharp that we'll need an answer back from Iran. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's not easy to predict the future on this, but some ideas we can take, some lessons identified from this situation. First of all, that Iran gave some early warning to some countries like Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordania, that showed some damage control. That United States, UK, France, and others help in a coalition. So the coalition is something like getting on their feet. And nobody really stand by Iran, not the Arab countries, not China, even Russia was some shining support, and of course that only the proxies were just helping the Iranian goals. So we have, I would say, three scenarios for all this situation in the future that can affect Portugal, and the Superior Council of National Defense that met yesterday, that we didn't hear too much about it, only knew a few things, and the press didn't care much about it too. So that shows us the importance that this crisis has, and the importance that the president and the political leadership gave to the situation. These scenarios I was talking about is that I would say four. One of them, of course, is the escalation and normalization of the situation with through a peace agreement that we would all prefer. But I'm not sure that it's a realistic one for the near future. But the other three would be the restrained conflict, an intense multi-front war, giving some extra confrontation between both sides, and regional confrontation that could lead to the intervention of the global powers in a more intense way. And this third one, I would say that is quite dangerous. In all of them, of course, Portugal should consider energy security and supply chain disruption. This third one, with regional confrontation, perhaps would lead to closing the straits. Bab el-Mandeb and even Hormuz could be closed. So Portugal would have problems with energy, but also some pressure on oil and prices of the global supply. Energy transition should be considered in this situation, taking the chance, but not forgetting the energy security. But of course, that would be an opportunity to move forward on this process. In other hand, the supply would be under a major stress. Total disruption would probably not be the case, but high operational costs and timing would create levels of extra stress, mostly in commodities. As I said before, the risking is important, and we should forget for a while for just in time and cost driven and other high economic ideas that wouldn't be the proper ones at the moment. Slowing down the economy through growth would have inflation rise, higher levels of risk, less confidence of the consumers and the investors. So higher rates and the Portuguese economy would be under stress and stretching to levels that could be at the same level of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemics. Stress indicator at the moment would be at the same level, I would say. So we should take care of trends and weak signals to understand where to make our egg, where to put our eggs at the moment. To conclude, just a final idea, we are probably facing one of the most critical moments of global society. That is definitely the revenge of geopolitics. The Cold War wasn't really the post-Cold War, wasn't finished, but now it is, and definitely we have to move forward with this new global environment, and Portugal has to know exactly where to stand. But to live with a positive vibe, I would like to remember that all crises also have window of opportunities for the sharpest ones. Portugal has the chance to achieve some goals at several dimensions. For instance, it is time to move forward in energy transition and supply chain de-risking. We are one of the best prepared for that. We should be fast and, of course, very conscious. On the other hand, we also should consider market fragmentation and move fast on the new markets. And last but not least, for Europe and for Portugal included, of course, it's a great chance to face the strategic autonomy as a possible goal. That would create an enormous opportunity for Portugal, and that could lead us to a different level. So with that, I would conclude my intervention. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Colonel. I'm a bit scared about after everything you said. Your scenarios are quite striking. Of course, I wasn't expecting anything less from you, of course, but well, it also gives us a notion of how hard also diplomacy must act in order to prevent and change some of these scenarios, because of course in terms of capabilities, of opportunities, strategic thinking and security wise, we can see that actually none of the realistic solutions are good. So I would now open the floor to our audience for questions. I would invite you both to either to raise your hand, thank you, Ambassador, I will give you the floor in a moment, or to write your questions in the chat box, and we will try to go from those asking to speak in person and those writing. I see also in the chat we already have some questions. But if you allow me, I will give the floor to the Ambassador of Egypt. Please, Mr. Ambassador, let me give you the floor.
I think you're hearing me now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for this initiative. I think it was a very important initiative to have a discussion about the issue of the Red Sea or any other issues. And I think it's very fruitful for all of us attending this. And from reading the email, understanding tension in the Red Sea region. Okay. I'm a country very much affected by that, directly affected by that. And it's not the first ever crisis or war that affects us directly. The Ukraine war affected us economically, and now we're affected once again by a situation. The most important thing I did not hear is that the root of this tension in the Red Sea, which is the war in Gaza. So it's very important not to lose focus, as you said, Your Excellency, that the role of diplomacy. And I think it's very important that we bring things to the root in our way in de-escalating the situation. Because I think the general gave us a very wide perspective of how far the crisis can reach. And this is what we have been talking about, the issue of a spillover and a regional war that can lead to no one knows what. So I think de-escalating the situation has to come of European countries and partner with all of us in the region in working on de-escalating and forcing two things not to happen. First of all, a response on Iran. This has to be controlled. There should be a European effort, an international more effort to do a control on that. This is very important. This is a step forward in the maritime security of Europe and the region. This is one thing. Secondly is ceasing fire, definitely, and moving towards a peace settlement, a very fast track of a peace settlement. So it's not an issue that the crisis erupted on its own. It did not. So this we should really not lose the focus on reasons behind. Okay. But again, moving from that point to the point that we have been discussing, the issue of the operation itself. Okay. We have been in Egypt talking and requesting a European maritime security strategy, or a maritime strategy for Europe to be adopted. We've been requesting that in our discussions with the European agencies in Brussels and European bilateral countries, because this is very important. Of course, the operation has its own relationship with the countries in the Red Sea and the logistics and things like that, cooperation within the framework of the normal cooperation that we have as Egypt and other countries with the European Union. But again, on the long-term perspective, are we going to have this operation? To what extent? This is a military situation that can escalate more or less and can lead to a more complicated issues, not just a convoy taking commercial ships via until Suez Canal and then moving beyond. It's more complicated than that. And we have to see it as a more of a very different situation than the COVID-19. COVID-19, we were all forced by a pandemic that affected all of us in different levels. But now this is not it. This is a situation, a political situation that needs to be resolved, mainly to reach a point of de-escalation and then cooperation. I think a dialogue, again, it's very important to see that a dialogue with the countries on the Red Sea, we have already an operational organization of the Red Sea countries that need this discussion. We do not only talk about security, but on a more strategic level of cooperation. A European discussion with the countries like Egypt, like Saudi, like Djibouti, like it's very important. It's very important to have this open dialogue. It's very important that the situation or the this is an opportunity, again, as we said, crisis provides opportunity. This is an opportunity to set a kind of dialogue to reach a point of common interest, common cooperation that can prevent definitely a situation like that from erupting once more. This is very important. Okay. We, on the other hand, for Portugal, of course, as you said, a flagship by Portugal is an incident and a very serious incident that we really condemn. But on the other hand, this signals out how complicated the situation can get. The direct effect that we are talking about, supply chain, the telecommunication, which are two main parts of the partnership between the region, the wider MENA region, and Europe and beyond to the States and Latin America. So it's quite important that we need more or less a deepening dialogue on cooperation, on security measures, on economic cooperation in that field with the region itself. And I think this is one of the important things. On the other hand, we see very much a role for Portugal that we see beyond from the COVID, from the experience of the COVID, which is very important, is the supply chain, the sustainability of the supply chain. We see that in connecting Sinish with the Suez Canal Economic Zone, logistic areas where you can maintain, it's in favor of Europe, it's in favor of the region, to have this role and discussions that we have already established and ongoing, to have this discussion of having a sustainable supply of chain, whether in energy or in commodities, generally speaking. And I think countries like Portugal is an essential partner in that perspective and that strategy. Portugal is in a unique geographical place where Sinish is a connector for Latin America, for West Africa, for on our side, for Suez Canal, for other areas. So I think it's more of those opportunities that we really need to raise. We really need to focus on moving forward through that. For the military perspective, I think it's very dangerous. Right now, the situation in the Red Sea is becoming very dangerous, and the developments. And I am again, on a personal level, I'm very worried how would Israel respond to Iran. And I hope that things are a bit controlled on the international sphere. But again, if we can imagine that tomorrow we have a ceasefire in Gaza, there are no reasons for the Houthis, the so-called, the reasons for their own campaign on commercial and things like that, or the Iranians to do whatever. So I think, again, the core is very important. The focus on the core, I don't want to see us dealing with the complications and dealing with complication after complication after complication until we forget the roots of the problem itself and how this erupted. We need very much to focus and collaborate our efforts in that perspective. Other than that, I would love to see a more deepening dialogue between the European Union and the regions of the country on the Mediterranean and the Red Sea concerning the maritime strategy, maritime security, cooperation in different perspectives. Thank you very much for allowing me this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Maybe I'll give the floor to our guest speakers for an answer. Mihai, would you like to go ahead and answer the ambassador? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador. Points well taken. You're absolutely right. The solution is to de-escalate. I also think that if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, then the situation will de-escalate in the Red Sea, and then we can speak about more other cooperation opportunities, and maritime security is an area where all the countries in the region have common interests with the EU, and it's definitely there are many opportunities there. It's an area also that the EU wanted to pursue further. That is last year and before the war started, and I think this is something doable because here there are no disagreements in some maritime threats, and I think it's also an area where it's very easy to forge cooperation and trust. Then on the open dialogue, Ambassador, absolutely right. There are many economic interests, and de-escalation is the solution. I think this points also to what Joanna said earlier about the role of diplomacy versus military power. We see that military solutions don't work in the region, and they won't work. And diplomacy is needed. Maybe I would like also to react to a point that the Colonel made about the public opinion, and here I think it's very important for Europeans to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it, especially with this with the Operation Aspidis, which could be perceived also as a military reaction, and it needs to be explained that, of course, it's strictly defensive, but its purpose is also to build cooperation in the region and to look into those common interests that the ambassador has made. And I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mihai. Colonel?
Mr. Ambassador, of course, Egypt is one of the countries is most affected by this situation for several reasons, and it's been the adult in the room, so perhaps you deserve congratulations for that. I would say that the escalation, nobody really wants, I think, escalation in the region, at least the horizontal one, because it would create a situation that would be quite difficult to solve in the future. The real problem is that we still have, as you said, a war going on that has roots, historical roots, and is not really easy to have a peace agreement that considers all the interests of each part of the war. We don't really have international management crisis system. Our United Nations was built in post Second World War, and it still has some tricky things that cannot allow, that doesn't allow the solving actual problems. Even when we have Security Council resolution, sometimes it's said is not mandatory and so on. So it's not easy to solve all problems with our international system as it is. Of course, we have the great powers, but the great powers by themselves, they have also different interests, and is not easy to put them in a common goal to solve all the questions. On the other hand, the Houthis by themselves, they, of course, they are using the Gaza situation, but it's not only that. I'm not sure about the future, because the piracy by themselves, it gives them some leverage internal, because they have some economic issues, some internal problems to solve in the part of Yemen they control, and also because they want to quite show themselves for other purposes, for instance, as a great partner and proxy of Iran, and that will bring them some support. In the other hand, they are quite concerned about being an important actor in the region. So I would say that it's not so easy to solve only with the peace agreement in Israel. Hopefully, you're right, sir. But I would say that there are 4 steps that we must consider, and that are the risk management steps. We have to understand, of course, we have to analyze, getting information and so on. And the most important is to mitigate and resolve the situation. To mitigate, have to move really fast to make sure that it doesn't escalate. We have to make sure that there won't be strike back after strike back and lead this to a different level. And respond would create conditions for a long period of as a strong peace agreement with a long period of peace in the region, than trying to create ties. But as we saw, that's a Montesquieu idea with centuries, that trade would create less interest in war, because power would be relegated to second level, when we consider that welfare and prosperity would be in the first level. But the world changed. We thought about that in the post-Cold War period, but now we realize that the geopolitical power is still on, and that's why I talked about the geopolitical revenge. There's a lot going on. It's not so easy to put all at the same table, and talking about the peaceful future, and to understand that we have to consider all these people dying, all this situation, of course, in the region. With that, I would conclude. Maybe we could elaborate later, but I would just say that it's very important to have regional actors acting exactly with moderation, and trying to de-escalate the environment, and not allowing that the direct actors react too strongly, in a way that is impossible to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Of course, I think every actor's regional and world actor is important in this conflict. Every action is quite important. I'll maybe alternate between the people asking to speak directly and those that have placed the questions in the chat box, just to give everyone a chance. I think there's 2 in the chat box that can be connected to questions. So one from Francisco Oliveira. Thank you to both speakers for the insightful presentations. Could you elaborate a bit on how can global supply chains be made more resilient to disruptions? And then the second one, The economic and social impacts of described Red Sea events are cumulative in Portugal and Europe inflation. Even a low-intensity protracted conflict will have high cumulative impacts. How long can parties, Western navies, and the Houthi movement maintain security efforts and disruption of navigation? Are we facing a new form of asymmetric warfare in which Western military capabilities, present and upgraded as suggested, will be too expensive to face an attrition conflict? Are we facing Europe's security and economy death by 1,000 cuts process? I don't know if you'd like to start, Mihai.
Yeah, sure. I can have a go to the questions. Very first one on the global supply chains. Here, I think the way to strengthen them, at least a case that was made in Europe, was to increase cooperation between all the private sector actors and government actors. And here, I think a good practice is from the protection of critical underwater infrastructure, where it was clear that the private sector by itself or governments by themselves cannot tackle this issue. And it requires combined solutions where there is, of course, exchange of information between the private sector and different governments, governmental agencies. And then what is needed is also division of labor. Who does what in protecting this infrastructure? What is the role of governments? What is the responsibility? What is the role of the private sector? And here, I think there have been many discussions in Europe about this and how to better protect critical infrastructure. And the way forward at this point is, of course, to bring everyone in a room and discuss about this. As to what solutions, I really don't know at this point. I think this is just the first step to bring them together and see exactly how to better share information, how to split responsibilities, where to find the funding to ensure security of this critical underwater infrastructure. Then second question was on costs. No, firstly, it was how can parties maintain security? How long can the parties maintain security efforts and disruption of navigation? Well, I mean, if you go back in November, would you have said that the attacks will continue to escalate over the next 6 months? I'm not so sure. So I don't think anyone has the answer to this, but it seems they can go for long. And the military response doesn't yield the needed deterrence that was aimed at. Now, when we look at, of course, the missions that we operate there, of course, we need to discuss about costs, because downing all the drones, the missiles with other missiles, of course, costs a lot of money. For instance, the drones used by the Houthis are relatively cheap. But by comparison, the interceptors and missiles that are used to down them are extremely expensive. And this brings the question, how will this play out on long term if these efforts need to be sustained? Of course, the Europeans will need two things. They will need the capabilities, of course, the missiles to continue to replenish stocks, and then they will need the funding to be able to pay for that. And this, I think, it's a very relevant question. I don't have the answer to it, but it's definitely something that's on the minds of all the European countries. It's the minds of the European Union leadership, and of course it's a general debate here about the capabilities, about stocks. The debate that is very much present when we're discussing about supporting Ukraine. So I think everything is interconnected. Then, if we're facing a new form of asymmetric warfare, I think Yes, it's I would call these gray zone attacks that I've also mentioned in the beginning of my intervention, that are difficult to tackle. Sometimes they're difficult to attribute to a specific actor. Of course, in the case of Red Sea, we know the details, but in case of other attacks, for instance, against critical infrastructure, it's more difficult to attribute them to a specific actor, and then to, of course, to enforce some sort of punishment, because it's difficult to prove that. And here, of course, I have the example of the Baltic Connector in the Baltic Sea. So I think, yes, in a sense, there is a change in trends. Another change is now the use of smaller platforms. So when we're talking about maritime security and naval engagement, we see a shift from a bigger platform that are like bigger, very well-armed ships, to smaller platforms that are multi-modular. And this is the case that we see, of course, in the Black Sea, and is the strategy deployed by the Ukrainians, using unmanned water and underwater vehicles against bigger platforms. So I think the future in this case will be these kinds of platform, rather than these big ships that once lost, it's a big loss. Basically, and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mihai.
Well, Mihai already said quite a good part of the answers. So I just would had 3 bullet points. First of all, we must consider a strong political leadership, and we have some strategies, national and not global, but European strategies, like national security strategy, that define exactly the direction, the priorities, the goals, the most important sectors that we have to consider. And of course, it needs some cooperation between public and private institutions. So those priorities would show the actions we have to manage and how to do it, the timings and so on. So in the supply chain, I would say that we have to consider 2 main process. One of them is the de-risking, as I mentioned before, that considers in opposition for decoupling, it considers that we have to manage the risk, the security, the energy security risk, the supply chain risk, and so on, with the new suppliers, new routes, technology that would solve some types of problems, innovation, of course. We have to go for it really fast. And as it was shown during the COVID crisis and the first days of the Ukrainian crisis, the Europeans had their industry in China, their energy in Russia and Middle East, and their security mostly in the NATO and US system. And it realized that it was not secure for Europe, and move on really fast. And I think that showed that Europe is able, when has a goal, is able to be fast and quite proficuous on the answer that he's able to give. So if the European economy is quite under stress, yes, but it is strong, and it knows when it has all members decided to a combined answer, it is really fast, showing us some extra possibilities. So it would be some kind of balance between security and prosperity, not being just lead to one of these sides. I would also like to add to the asymmetric warfare. It's not new. I would say that, as Mr. Ambassador from Egypt just said, that probably with ending the peace agreement in the Gaza conflict, the Houthis would de-escalate the situation in Red Sea, most probably. So it won't last too long, I think. But in other hand, we need to keep some forces, some capabilities nearby. We already had with Atalanta in the Horn of Africa, with some forces, European forces in French bases in Abu Dhabi. So we must keep some capabilities around in order to make sure that stabilization process goes till the end. So we have non-state or post-Westphalia actors for quite a while now, and now we have some lessons learned from that, and we know exactly how to act, and I'm sure that know exactly how not to act and how it could fuel new situations in the near future. Thank you.
Yes, but it's always the same dilemma between weapons and butter, isn't it? We have a few last 5 minutes before we end, and I see our colleague from the Hungarian Institute of Foreign Relations, Dr. Ramachandra. Would you like to make a question? I don't know if we'll have time for much more.
Yes, I will.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it was an excellent discussion, and I'm very happy about that. We mentioned a lot of issues that it would be nice to organize more sessions on this. One thing I would like to ask is that normally if we see from far away, it seems that Europe is not concerned about its immediate neighborhood, but it wants to go in far off countries and defend trade routes. One issue is that of Turkey. It already controls the choke point between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Now it's moving troops to Somalia, and it wants to sit at the mouth of the Red Sea. And Turkish policy is very ambiguous. How do you explain what is the relationship between European security concerns and Turkish ambitions, some say neo-Ottoman ambitions in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea?
Thank you, Dr. Ramachandra. Maybe we go on the opposite way this time. And Colonel, can you start? Can you have a go?
Of course, Turkish is quite interesting actor in this global international system. In one hand, it has some Ottoman historical roots, and that is of course linked very directly to their national feeling. I do understand that, because Portugal also have some historical roots from our history, and it has the idea, and Erdogan showed that in the Arab Spring, that could lead the Muslim world. Turkey is a democracy, of course, has some issues, of course, as many other countries, but is the only Muslim country that belongs to the Euro-Atlantic security system. So I would much appreciate that Turkey could keep on this side in order to help to have good relations with the Muslim world, in the African, and even the all Turkic, Turkish-speaking and Turkic ethnic countries in the Central Asia. Of course, it's not so easy, even because of some internal issues, as I said before, and that would create a quite difficult situation if some extreme situation would occur internally. Hopefully we won't have that. I think that danger was overtaken a few years ago, and will lead to more and more democratic system with more and more capability to spread this liaison between democratic and Muslim values. Of course, we still have some links with some African countries. That is one, perhaps the third goal from external policy from Ankara, and is trying to improve mostly economic relations. But of course, there's always something extra. It's normal; all countries do that. But I think they will be able to link correctly, mostly with eastern part of Africa, Somalia till Mozambique. We can see Turkish interests in Mozambique too. So all this coastal region is developing with the help of Turkey too. But in security terms, and I'll end with this, in security terms, Turkey has a great military force. It's the second biggest from NATO, and some capabilities too that are really important to keep on the scope of NATO interests in the region. And I think it's mandatory to have links with this Turkish policy too. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Mihai.
Yeah, maybe just to quickly add, well, having in mind that I don't work specifically on Turkey, but to add to what the Colonel said, of course, Turkey is also a NATO member. We know there are many disagreements between NATO and other allies. I think this is normal in an alliance such as NATO. Turkey is also in the past years has sort of had a transactional foreign policy, and we see this in many cases, such as the Sweden accession to NATO and other cases. And I mean, these disagreements are normal, and there are ways to overcome them. But maybe I'll just add that I don't agree that Europe is not concerned with its neighborhood. I think the European Union is very concerned with it, but it's also trying to project power beyond to areas that are not in our immediate vicinity, such as the South China Sea, for instance. And this is part of the European sort of global ambition, global sort of strategy, and I think we'll continue to see this. Now, of course, there's also a question of resources to match these ambitions, and here is the question mark to put these resources behind these strategies and implement them. Because if these strategies stay only on paper, as it was the case in the past with some strategies at the EU level, then they don't get us closer to the so-called goal of strategic autonomy. I'm not a big fan of this term, but I will understand in this case as the ability to act by ourselves in different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mihai. And well, unfortunately, we've reached our time limits. We already surpassed it. And so we won't be able to take on more questions, unfortunately. But I would very, very much like to thank the expertise and knowledge that our experts shared with us here during this hour and a half. This is a passionate subject, very on the news one also as well. And maybe, Mihai, you will now go to Google and see what happened to the Portuguese vessel in Hormuz. I understood that you weren't aware of that. But so thank you so much. Thank you also to all the public that was with us for this hour and a half. And I hope we could contribute in a little bit to enlighten everyone and to share more knowledge and more information on this important conflict in this important area of the globe. Thank you again, everyone, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.